Countdown crankbaits, guys. This is something that if you're a serious musky angler, you need to add to your game. Now, these are specialist baits, right? These are not something you're going to need every single trip you're out on, but they can save the day more often than not. You know, Joe Bucher is somebody that's utilized sinking or countdown baits for a long time, and JBO has perfected this one with the countdown Bucher. And then this is the Suick Cisco Kid. There's not a lot of options when it comes to sinking baits that are going to hit extreme depths, right? Again, because they're specialized. So you have just a few options. Obviously, you can get any bait that you want and weight it down. But what's important with these is they're designed to sink, so the action is not going to be impeded by the additional weight. You know, if you were to add bell sinkers or a ton of suspend dots or something of that nature. So these are for specific situations. I'll try to work you through some of the ideas, some scenarios, hypothetical scenarios, you could apply these. First things first, when I get one of these sinking DepthRaiders or countdown, however you want to call it, I'm going to add a split ring, right? I want to open the action up. So get my box, my trusty box of Musky Shop split rings. Right, this guy's right out of the pack. Gonna do this, okay? Now, something else that I like to do with these baits, which is kind of an odd duck. Now, I'm going to use electrical tape just for the visual. I like to use just heavy-duty clear tape if I can. Ooh, the hooks are already sharp there. And I like to bind the hooks to the body. You're going, why would you do that? We're going to fish this thing deep. Anything that can get this thing snagged up or in a tough spot, I want it held back. So my goal by doing this is to bind the hooks to the body so they're always behind the lip, right? So the lip is going to be a protective layer against the hooks. So as I'm filling the bait and I'm rooting this through thick cover, thick rocks, deep and dirty stuff, this is going to help me out. Again, you can use clear tape. I don't think muskies can see that well anyway, so black tape doesn't scare me at all. Or even small rubber bands, right? Now, we're talking muskies here, and it's electrical tape. You'll get the hooks in. This is not going to, people go, oh, is that? No, it's a muskie. It'll help you out there. So at this point, it might not be the prettiest thing you've ever seen, but I've now protected this bait from quite a bit of snagging and fouling down the bottom, right? If you can see, most of the points are hid behind this lip, right? If you want to go to the extreme, you can, and I would recommend, I do it on some of mine, is reduce this rear split ring and heat shrink this guy back if you're so inclined, right? And now we have a very streamlined bait that the hooks are not going to get, you're going to get far less snags fishing deep than you would with them hanging, because what will happen, we'll get into a rock, and if the hooks are hanging down, they'll get meshed in there, pretend that's a rock and they're hanging. This is protecting the bait far more by the lip, right? So as you see the lip there, it's protecting the hooks. Mr. Muskie grabs it, he's gonna get lit up, so there's no problem there. Okay, and you can do that with the Cisco Kid too, if you're so inclined. Now, if we're gonna successfully fish with a countdown crankbait, I mentioned that it's a specialist bait, we need to understand the scenario. So, one could simply walk out to the water and say, we need to fish countdown crankbaits today. I've never done it. It's not an epiphany you have very often. There's days you get, we better throw top waters because it looks right, or we better throw glide baits, or we better fish Titans or other dive and rise because it looks like those situations. Countdown crankbaits are something I turn to when my back is against the wall and nothing else is happening. Let's say you're on your big annual trip and nothing's clicking, or you're fishing early fall in the north and you can't even get a bite on a sucker. Muskies are holding deep. So we've done our pattern, we understand. Some of the scenarios, or the actual areas that I'm going to use these, are going to be points, right? So deep submerged points as far as structural elements. Targeting holes. If you see like a shoreline and there's a dip or an erosion, right, where muskies will structurally gravitate to, I'm going to target that with countdown crankbait. As well, man-made cover, such as fish cribs. We're sitting on a row of fish cribs right now that we're actually going to target with this. So a row of fish cribs that are down at 25 feet, if we know that muskies are holding and they are tight, you're seeing them on down scan, side scan, live image, whatever it is, and you're seeing muskies that are tight, they're 15 feet down, 20 feet down off of these cribs, and they're inaccessible, and they're unwilling to come up on rubber, they're unwilling to do anything else. This is going to be one of the few tools. This, the Cisco Kid, and tweaking some baits, there's not a lot of tools for us because it's such a limited scenario. But like I said, Joe Bucher figured this out a long time ago, that he needed one of these in the arsenal and added it again with the Cisco Kid. So we're going to target deep areas. Obviously we can count this down to any depth. Now we'll start casting here and sort of walk you through some of the things you can do with this. As far as rod and reel, I think anything will suffice for the way we're going to be fishing. You don't need a specialized reel or anything of that nature. I think any gear ratio is going to be perfectly serviceable. And, you know, heavy action rod, throwing a big, you know, this is an 8-inch DepthRaider. So the first thing that we can observe with these baits, they have a pre-calculated fall rate, right? It's about 1 foot a second. All right, I'll pull it up here. It's falling about 1 foot a second, right? It's just going down. I may have grabbed it with the leader. Now it was just going that way, right? So we know if we need to hit 15 feet, we might have to time out a cast and really focus on letting that bait get down. So if we know that muskies are on these cribs and they're holding deep, that we need to be patient. So not only is it going to be important that we have the right bait to target the area that we're fishing, we're also going to need a casting strategy that works. So if I have to count to 15 to get this bait where I want it, 1, 2, you know, count to 15. If my boat is drifting, by the time this bait gets where it's intended to be, I'm not in proper alignment and I'm actually going to be on the back side of the boat. So what we need to do to be as effective as possible, right, is think about which way the wind is pointing, which way the wind's pushing. Because right now, and I did it intentionally, the wind is pushing us down, right? I want to focus on really good boat control in this scenario is what I'm getting at, right? So what I would prefer to do with this line of cribs is I want to be nose into the wind, which is going to allow me to be able to hold way more accurately to utilize these baits. So I'm going to get on the back side of these cribs here, right? I'm going to turn, the wind's blowing this way, so the nose of the boat's up here. So I've taken out now, when I got to count this thing down, I've taken out wind drift really pushing me. I can kind of hold my position. Now, if you have the luxury of spot lock on your boat, fishing with countdown crankbaits, that's the time to use it, right? So I can just let this thing get down to where it needs to be without the influence of the wind or anything of that nature, or current even for that matter, if it's going to push you to the side with the bait. But I can spot lock right here, or I can hold my position. And so what I'm going to do is once I've got that bait down to the depth, I'm counting it down. I'm literally, you have to count it down. We can do a linear retrieve. So we're going to target that deep pocket real quick. Let me do this again. So let's say we've got the crib here. Throw this guy out. We got plenty of things we got 15 seconds now to think about what we've should have done, could have done, you know, long lost lovers, cars you should have bought. Now it's time to fish. So anyway, what I'm going to start with is I can just simply do a straight retrieve here and just bring this bait in, just like your standard crankbait, right? Something I mentioned, if we're targeting muskies that are deep and holding on deep structure or deep cover such as a crib, I'm not looking at anything speedy, so we can kind of just creep this guy along. We've got that classic Bucher action, that big fight wobble there, and bringing that bait in, right? So simple, simple, simple. All we do is throw it out, turn the handle, muskie on in, right? So that's great for your bare bone basics. Throw it at deep cover, throw it at deep structure, count it down, reel it in, right? We can add some fun stuff with this by throwing it out. Again, long, horrific 15 seconds of contemplation. I'm kidding. We'll throw this bait out, let it get to where it is. Anyway, We can crank it down, but we know that this bait sinks. We can get it down to depth and we can actually treat it with a rip, like we would a Kraken or a tube. This bait got down there fast, right? Now, how popular are Krakens and tubes right now in big rubber presentations? They're eminently popular in musky fishing, right? Again, what do we follow them up with, right? I've talked in the past, you could use a bait like a Steve's tailgater and helicopter baits down, things of this nature. But now, if we're utilizing sinking crankbaits, we now have a deep ripping option out of a crankbait, right? So I know that that bait's down at 15 feet and I'm ripping that over that crib. Rip, let it fall. Rip, let it fall, right? Now with these baits, you can kind of let them hop in place to some degree with less advancement. Like I said, I'm slack lining that, all right? But if I want to rip that like a tube, I'm getting a bait that's going surging and then falling, surge and fall. So that upward motion in the rod is going to, again, create that counterbalance. So with these sinking baits, if you can visualize, he's falling. So if I rip him up, he goes and then falls. Up, you'll feel it when you rip that bait vertically. You'll feel it surge up and then that bait's going to tip down and fall down. Like I said, what a deadly follow-up for tube fish. Or if you're fishing, let's say you're fishing with a buddy and you're moving fish on Krakens or Red October tubes or whatever it is, and you're not getting the eats, adding this in is fantastic because like we said, we've got that erratic action. So to that, I know this thing's falling a foot a second, right? So I'm gonna rip this bait and every time I pause it, it's falling. So now I'm just have a rip fall, right? Ripping. Now, another reason I bind the hooks on this creates less hook foul, leader foul when I'm fishing this nature, right? So now I have that action of this bait, surge, fall, surge, fall. That's deadly with rubber baits. It's no different here. I have in the past done very well by taking one of these Bucher baits, you know, that there's no fear in adding more weight to it. You know, dressing this guy out with a big grub or something of that nature. If you want even more flutter on the fall, it'll slightly slow it down. Slammer makes a thing called fishtails, which are a great addition for crankbaits available at the Musky Shop. And it adds like a tail profile on a rear hook. So if you want to use that as a counter, you know, a counterbalance to jerkbait fishing or something to follow up with your Krakens or your tube presentations, it can be absolutely deadly. So not only can we count this down and fish cribs, things of that nature, we can also do that with structure, right? So again, muskies use structure to control where they're at in their environment. We could go on that one for hours, but structure is highly important. Now, if we know that the structural elements of a body of water, let's say that main lake point, we have a point coming out into the water, and we know muskies use this point, but this, you know, in a tough day, we're having problems targeting them with big rubber or other deep probative baits like tubes and Krakens. These countdown crankbaits are going to allow us to contour structure so much easier. So theoretically, let's say we have a point here, you know, and it starts, this is the high point, this is like the shoreline, and this is the deep section. You know, you can take that countdown crankbait, throw it at a shallower, if you will, part of the structure, and that thing is always going down while moving forward. So you can actually contour a deep point or contour a hump by feeling, right? You got to feel the bait as it's making contact with cover and structure, and you can actually contour very bottom tight to a point or any other structure, what element you want, all the way back to the boat, right? It's absolutely deadly. So when we get in a scenario where you run into a scenario where muskies are not, you know, doing what we want them to do, they're being negative and neutral, and we actually have to focus on structure as our main means of identifying where actively feeding muskie is. Probative baits of this nature are deadly. Like I said, don't be singularly minded that all deep presentations are rubber based. This comes into play heavily. Now, something that can be said about these baits is a option in a standard crankbait scenario, right? is we talk about it as far as dead sticking, right? And I've done this at numerous times with these baits, is we will have a scenario where we're fishing just straight DepthRaiders or whatever crankbait it is, right? And we're just doing this. We're doing the normal thing. We might pause it or jerk it a little bit. And we're getting fish that are coming in, right? And they're just coming in and they will not eat, they will not eat, they will not eat, as the dead stick ability of this thing, right? You now have a different option. So if I'm fishing standard DepthRaiders or any just general musky crankbait, and they're coming in and they just will not eat in the figure eight. They won't eat rubber. They want, and there's times where muskies are dialed in on a certain size and a certain vibrational profile. However, they just don't want to commit in the eight. It's the never-ending problem with muskies. They always are going to want to mix up. These things can save your tail on occasion. Just have them one in a row. This is not a bait that most of us are ever going to need 50 of, right? But having these in your arsenal is deadly to really save those days. Now, something else I like to do. We talked about contouring structure. We've talked about man-made cover, such as cribs, and this being utilized in that scenario. Is, again, fishing this in really rocky bottom areas, right? It's common knowledge that when things cool off and we get into the fall and things are going to, muskies get on the rocks. Well, why? The rocks tend to hold more thermal energy. They radiate just a little bit more warmth, right? And muskies will be smack dab on them, right? Tight, tight, tight. You can't be any tighter to the bottom than a bait that will go straight to the bottom and that you can contour with, right? So with this bait, the additional weight is up here. He falls like this. He falls head down, hence the hooking deal here. If I know I can make cover contact, bang, when I make contact with that cover, I know on a rocky area that this bait is going to come into that area, cranked in, boom. And for a second, it's going to stand there before it falls, right? These fall head first, right? When we're showing you, you put them in the water, they fall head first, right? That thing's falling straight down, head first. It wants to go down head first. So when I bang it into the rocks, bam, before it's going down, right? So all the weight's in the front. I can kind of get this jammed in stand-up routine for a second before it kicks down, right? Which is kind of deadly, bam, right? And then I'll rip it out of there. So if I'm fishing like a rock shelf or a rock ledge in the early fall or the colder part of the year, or in a bad cold front, right? Taking this bait, we'll throw it out there, all right, we're getting to the rocks here. You reel into the rock, you feel it, boom. Rip it up after you feel that contact. Keep going, and you're just grinding. You know, we've talked about, and for years people have talked about ticking and clicking. This is beyond ticking and clicking. This is you're trying to carve your name in the rocks with the lip of this thing. You're getting down and dirty. So I'll get into those rocks, and every time I feel that contact, I'll kind of rip him out of danger, right? And then just keep grinding across those rocks with this thing. Because at a certain point, if we know those muskies are as tight can be, and we know that they're there and we've done our patterning right, you know, there's the dynamic of ticking and clicking. And for those that don't know, we'll take a standard, the slammer here. Pretend this is a rock. You take your crankbait in, he hits the rock, you let him float back out, right? Boom, this number. Well, if you're getting follows, you're getting dialed in, and ticking and clicking is almost working. It's almost there. Bashing into the rocks and really making prolonged hard hits and grinding with sinking crankbaits can be deadly. I'll grab this Cisco Kid over here. You know, it's a different option, and it also has a couple unique properties. So this bait also sinks, right? About a foot a second. Straight down. It's all head weighted, right? What differentiates this bait from the Bucher, it's got this metal lip. All right, so we have a sinking bait that's intended to be deep. Well, it's just a metal lip, boys. we can do some stuff with that, right? So with this, I now can make a bait that is adjustable. It's not meant to be. You know, don't take it back to the store and say, hey, my lip's wrong. You can tweak your run depth on this bait a little bit, right? If you really need a plow of a bait. And again, talking about grinding, if you bend that thing down and you bind the hooks on that bait, it's just bludgeoning through rocky cover, right? So you could throw that guy out and just absolutely just hit him into the rocks just like we did with the Bucher, or dial that lip in so you're just scraping. You're just dragging, dredging hard cover. You know, that can work in sand and muck, but obviously you're gonna get fouled up. But fishing hard cover such as rock and ledges with these things, get that lip in there and just make that contact with some pulses. You know, realistically, with these baits and with these countdown baits, it's something that you don't want to use, but when you want to catch a muskie, you got to add them to your game. You know, at times, we got our 1 week, we got the 1 weekend, we got our big muskie trip. Don't let having a couple baits be the difference between you being successful or not. Adding a couple to your game plan, implementing them in the ways I've talked about, and inventing your own is going to really save the day. When fishing conditions are tough, you can still put a big muskie in your net with countdown crankbaits.